Hello Year 12. Firstly, congratulations for getting to this part of the course. We've lost about 25% of people at the moment, so you're doing well. Now, before I begin and go into the nitty-gritty of how to write a research proposal for the EPQ Artefacts, because that's what this recording is going to be about, I very much suggest you watch my video on YouTube, which is a very detailed account for how a report works for an artifact. It's very different from a report, a written report, a normal essay-style EPQ. You get a lot more flexibility. There's not an awful lot of guidance, but my video will give you an idea of the main ingredients that you're going to need. Now, in terms of what we're looking for here in the research proposal, each artifact is very different. So what I say here, you should feel free to adapt and make it suit your own project. Firstly, however, I would like an introduction of at least 150 words. And in that, I would like you to introduce the idea of your artifact. Why are you building it? What's the purpose behind it? What's the thinking behind it, etc.? It may be that you are doing something about, say, eating disorders in teenagers. Be a good idea to show that there's a need for your artifact, that it's going to serve a purpose. Because remember, a report needs a research question, but an artifact needs a research purpose. And it has to be a purpose that can be tested and evaluated. That's the absolute key thing. So I need you to explain exactly what that purpose is and why your artifact is needed. And you can give a very brief idea in the introduction, showing that you're going to do some kind of research. Don't forget the EPQ is a research-based project qualification. So the artifact must be informed by as much research as if you were doing a 5,000-word project, written report, I should say. Now, the research section of the proposal, and some of the ideas that I think you should look into are, what are the different areas that you will be researching? Are there multiple areas? To give you an example, if you were making a documentary about concussions in rugby, you would need to do multiple forms of research. First of all, you would need to maybe find out what people of your age know about rugby and the dangers, etc. You might want to interview some of the sports teachers, the coaches, and some of the rugby players. Secondly, you would need to find out and research documentary making. So you would have to watch documentaries, read books about documentaries, maybe complete a course in filmmaking or documentary making. There's a whole area that you could research over there. And then you'd have to do the kind of biology, sports science of it. Brain trauma, going into the idea of the neurological damage, how it works, etc. So do you see that when you do an artifact, it may be that you have multiple areas of research. Will you, as part of your research, be consulting with experts? Very often this is the case. So if you're doing something technical, making a machine, etc., you might need to see multiple experts. So in the past, we've had students who fixed motorbikes up, for instance. They've needed to go and see welders. They've needed to go to maybe Harley Davidson to find out about electronic elements of motorbikes, etc. So whatever your artifact is, if there is a technical, mechanical, machine part of it, you most certainly need to find experts in the field. However, you might also find academic experts. So if you're doing a science or maths artifact, you may need to go beyond the school and find experts in those particular areas. So in this research proposal, tell me what you think you're going to do, why you need it, and what are you going to do with that data. Then, do you need a sort of more traditional literature review section? A literature review is when you go and read the material in your different area. Each of the artifacts will be different and unique. I would recommend that everybody shows that they have done some kind of academic reading. If you want to get a grade A or an A star, you really do need to show that you've looked at a variety of sources and that you have designed some kind of way of critically and evaluating the sources. I've said in the critical evaluation lesson and in my screencast, which is on YouTube, that critical evaluation really will decide whether your project moves into the AA star region. So be very careful to tell me what you're going to do about that, okay? And then really explain how these sources of information link to what it is you're trying to do, and how are you going to use this information to inform and underlie the structure of the artifact. Now, it's absolutely vital in the EPQ that you chart your skills acquisition. What are the skills that you're going to acquire as you're going to do that? But in an artifact in particular, we need to think about this more than in an essay. Artifacts go wrong when there are too many skills. So I want a big part of this research proposal to address some of these ideas. What are the skills that you're going to be needing to learn? Soldering, welding, film editing, dressmaking, different artistic techniques that you've not used before. So I want a full account and an audit of the skills. And you're going to say what those skills are, and then you will need to tell me how you're going to acquire these skills. And they need to be feasible. So one of the things that you need to convince me in the proposal is you've actually thought about things. Artifacts, as I've said before, go wrong when they're too complex and there are too many skills. So please think very carefully about this. Are you going to be interviewing people, or are you going to be working with people, or are you going to go on discussion forums or chat forums? Are you going to do a Coursera or a FutureLearn course? What are you going to do to make sure that you have all of the skills necessary for your manufacturing? If you're doing a sort of a teaching artifact, as I have one of my students doing this year, have you spoken to teachers? Have you learned how to prepare lesson plans? Have you learned behavior management in classes? How are you going to acquire these skills? Do you have a technical mentor or a consulting specialist? The EPQ allows for these, but you need to explain to me how you're going to use them. And you also need to convince me that you're not trying to get them to do the work for you, that they are merely consulting people who are going to help you acquire the skills and knowledge for yourself. And as I say here, I strongly recommend, if you can, to do some courses online, because that's further evidence of skills acquisition that gets you grades in the EPQ. Now, in terms of the design features, are you making a physical product? Explain to me what you want it to look like. And you don't need to be specific at this point. You might draw a table and say, I'm thinking of these 3 ideas. I might be fabricating a building. On the other hand, I might just be doing a CAD drawing of one, etc. So you can give me different options that you're not sure of, and explain to me that you're going to experiment and decide on your design as you go along. I do want you to think very carefully, though, about how complex the construction is going to be. This year I had people drop out, amazing students, because they didn't realize just how long this was going to take. So if you are computer programming, if you are using laser cutters or 3D printing, really show me that you've thought about how many hours will go into the design and the manufacture and the construction, and that you've thought very carefully about the amount of skill. Sometimes people say that they want to build a robot. Is that really possible? Maybe you could just do a very basic robot arm. Remember that you're not getting the grades in the artifact for the skill in constructing the artifact. It's not that you were a mechanic or an engineer. You're going to get the grades showing the complexity of the research and the design process, and the thinking and the research that underlies the artifact. That's what is absolutely key, okay? So as I say, consider different designs. You can have different options. Give me details. You could do it in a table form if you like. I don't mind, as long as you show that you are thinking very carefully about the options available to you. I need you to think very carefully about the materials you need, the tools you need. How much will they cost? Do you have access to a workshop if you're making something? If you're making dresses, do you really have the ability to do this? Is it going to be possible within the time? Is it too complicated? Perhaps don't make the designs too complex. Don't have too much embroidery if you're doing a dress, for instance. Be realistic, be feasible. Think about it really, really carefully. And that's why I say it's a good idea to think, How long will it all take? How many hours? Maybe you could start breaking them down with estimates and think carefully, really carefully, about, do you really have the necessary skills while you're doing your A-levels and B-Techs? Will you have the time to really pick up some of the more intricate skills? And start to show me that you are predicting and thinking about the greatest challenges, and you're thinking about potential solutions to them. Now, it's a very good idea in an artifact to build a prototype or build an initial study. And that will, allow you to see whether your design is feasible or not, yeah? So this is the absolute key thing in the artifacts, this feasibility idea, okay? So conduct initial studies, etc. Start to see if it's feasible. Don't get 6 months into the project and then realize that this design can't work. Now is the time for us to work out what is possible and what is feasible. So start to think in terms of smart targets. Targets which are measurable and time-bound and that are actually achievable. Now, a great potential source for your research is primary research. However, in the EPQ, whether you're doing the essay or whether you're doing the artifact, primary research is optional. That said, it can be a very valuable part of it. And it's very important if you do things like interviews that you capture those interviews. You will need to have consent forms from people that show that you are going to use their opinions, etc., and that you've told them exactly how the research is going to work. I would also like you to record all of these interviews and to use some software like Otter to create transcriptions. So that's something that you can discuss in this research proposal. Again, if you are using interviews just like printed sources, I would like you to critically evaluate them. Look for bias. Are you going to cross-reference with other people? Don't go on one person's opinion only. Check it. Can you go onto the internet? Can you use discussion forums? Can you evidence a whole trail of research? That is the way to a top grade on the EPQ. And finally, you need to tell me about your evaluation stage for the EPQ. This is absolutely important. So you will need specific success criteria. How do you know that you have been successful? How will you evaluate and decide whether your artifact is fit for purpose? Did it do the job that you set out to do? Are you going to use surveys? Are you going to use focus groups? Are you going to have like an art exhibition? Does the success of your artifact maybe turn on the fact that you've done an engine and it simply has to work? So you need to explain to me exactly how you will evaluate it and how you will get this feedback so that you can write a self-evaluation part of your EPQ artifact report. And the final part of the report will be this bibliography or source list. Is it people? Is it interview people, experts, etc.? Give me a few details. Videos, websites, books, articles from journals, etc., newspaper articles, magazine articles. What's it going to be? Is it podcasts, TV programs, or even forums, as I say? The EPQ people do not care as long as the information is expert and really reliable, and there's evidence that you thought about it and selected different sources, evaluated it really carefully, and thought it through. Finally, the appendices can be a really rich area in your proposal, and you can attach this at the end. Do you want to put any mind maps in there? Do you want to put sketches in there? Do you want a kind of a table of a construction process? Do you have a flow chart? Have you started to think about how the construction will work? What are the different stages? Have you created any initial sketches or plans? If you're writing a story, have you started to chart a kind of narrative arc yet? And in terms of things like courses that you have started or anything that shows that you've started to buy things off the internet, that you've looked at Amazon.com and you're thinking about importing different things in. Correspondence, have you emailed people? Have you drafted an email getting ready to ask experts to help you? The appendices can be a rich place that shows exactly what it is that you're planning to do. And now in the second part of this video, I have got an excellent video from a student who did an artifact, and she's going to explain.
Hi everyone, I am Keja Alexi Delpesh, and I'm going to walk you through my EPQ research proposal. So for artifacts, it's slightly different compared to essays, so I will just give you the subtle nuances there as well. So as opposed to having a research question, we have a research purpose. So that is what I stated first in my proposal. Then I went into the introduction, where the main things that you talk about in regards to an artifact is what you're doing, why you're doing it, who it will impact, and most importantly, how will your artifact be evaluated. So I went into this, my introduction is about 200 words. So my EPQ is about addressing one of the major issues connected to the water crisis, which is pipe leakage. So I intend on creating an artifact for a prototype that can detect leaks effectively in underground water mains. The why aspect is in relation to personal connections to my home country, Trinidad and Tobago, as well as a project I worked on a couple of years ago. And I intend to continue working on this project through the extended project qualification. The people it will impact are third world countries, where the people that will use it will be water authorities, industrial inspection agencies, and NGOs. And finally, I stated that I will evaluate using a success criteria that I will create based on my research. Then we move into the basic literature review, which is basically all of your initial research supported by references and analytical sources. So your sources can be comprised of websites to journals to articles, interviews, so on. So I did my initial research here, and one of the main tips that I would give you is to reference and analyze your sources throughout the writing process. I think that would be one of the most efficient ways of conducting your research, so that you don't have to find the websites and reference everything towards the end of the project. So the literature review that I have here is about 900 words. I just went into detail about the various types of leak detection methods currently in the market, so that I can make an informed decision about the method that I would like to work on for the remainder of my project. You can see that I have highlighted some parts, underlined some parts, and all of the things in brackets are references. Then we move into primary research. So the literature review is all secondary data. And in the primary research section, I talk about the primary research that I would like to conduct later on in the project, so that I can make informed decisions about the design and construction of my prototype. Then the provisional conclusion. Usually in essays, you have a debate, you have a question, and the provisional conclusion is your response to that argument. For artifacts, the provisional conclusion is more about the evaluation aspect. How are you evaluating your artifact? Why are you evaluating it this way, and how is it suitable? So I will create a design brief and identify a few specification points to evaluate my prototype to discern whether it is suitable for real-world use. So you can see that I have written a design brief here, and then I have a couple of ideas for specification points that I will expand later on in the project. Then we have my bibliography, so these are all of my references in response to my literature review, followed by the source evaluation, so all of the sources that I used in my literature review. So you have the date published, the author, title, where you can find it, and then a brief analysis using CRAP.